My parents said they were proud, until I refused to pay $5,000 for their golden Christmas tree. They stopped inviting me to every holiday, every dinner, every memory. But when I bought my own $1 million apartment, they showed up cameras ready, pretending to be proud again. I let them talk. I let them smile. Then I slammed the door, and the world finally heard what they'd been hiding for years. I'm Madison Cole, and this is the sound of freedom disguised as revenge. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, don't forget to hit subscribe, smash like button, and tell us in the comments where you're tuning in from. The email came in just after 7 in the morning. The office was quiet, except for the low hum of the air conditioner and the sound of my own typing. My name flashed on the screen, Madison Cole, and right beneath it the subject line read, "Congratulations." Madison. For a second, I thought it was another company-wide announcement, something routine. But when I clicked it open, my heart began to race. Effective immediately, it said, "You are promoted to Senior Marketing Director. Your leadership on the Coastal Vista campaign has exceeded expectations. We're excited to see you continue shaping the brand." I read it 3 times. My hands trembled a little as I leaned back in my chair. For years, I'd been waiting to see words like that. And now that they were there, I just stared at them, almost afraid to blink, in case they disappeared. I printed the email and placed it on the corner of my desk. It looked too small a piece of paper for something that had taken me a decade to earn. Pride bubbled up inside me, right alongside the sharp ache of how much I'd had to do it all alone. I grabbed my phone and called Caroline, my closest friend, at the office. She picked up on the first ring. "Tell me you're calling because we're finally celebrating," she said. "I got the email I managed." There was a pause, then a squeal so loud it startled the intern outside my door. Madison. "I told you this day would come. Champagne tonight." I laughed. The sound shaky. "Maybe tomorrow. I'm driving to Santa Barbara. I want to tell my parents in person." The drive up the Pacific Coast Highway was pure California gold. Sunlight flashed on the water gulls, skimmed the waves, and for a while, everything looked perfect, the way you hope life will look once you've finally made it. I rolled down the window, the salty air filling the car, and thought about summers when my dad used to take my sister and me along this same road back when he still smiled easily. My parents' house sat on a quiet street lined with jacaranda trees, the purple flowers spilling over the sidewalks. When I pulled into the driveway, the house looked exactly the same. White shutters, manicured garden, a home sweet home sign still hanging by the porch. I could smell the faint trace of my mother's candles even before I rang the bell. She opened the door in a crisp cream blouse and pearl earrings, her hair perfectly set like she was expecting company, but not me. "Madison," she said, the smile not quite reaching her eyes. "You didn't say you were coming." "I wanted to surprise you," I said, stepping inside. The air smelled like vanilla and furniture polish. Everything was spotless like a showroom. The living room was already full. My sister Vanessa was there with her husband Daniel, and their 2 kids were running circles around the sofa. My father Robert sat in his recliner. The television muted, but still flashing light across his face. For a moment, I stood in the doorway, watching all of them, wondering if they'd even noticed I'd arrived. Vanessa spotted me first. "Maddie, you made it." She ran over and hugged me. "Mom, you didn't tell me she was coming." "I didn't know," Mom said, lightly returning to her casserole. "Dinner's almost ready." We sat down to eat. Lasagna, salad, garlic bread, the usual. The kids chattered, Daniel poured wine, and the clink of silverware filled the room. When there was finally a lull in the noise, I said it. I got promoted. The table quieted for half a second, then Vanessa clapped her hands. "Oh my God, that's amazing." Senior Director Daniel smiled. "Congratulations, Madison. That's huge." Even my dad looked up from his plate. "Well, good for you," he said, nodding once before going back to eating. Mom wiped her hands on a napkin and looked at me. "So what does that mean exactly?" "More hours. More stress." "It means I'm in charge of my own team now," I said. "And the salary doubled." She arched an eyebrow. "Doubled?" I nodded, waiting for a reaction. "That's nice," she said finally. "Just don't let it change you." Vanessa frowned. "Mom, what? I'm happy for her." Mom said, reaching for her glass of wine. "I just know how people get when they start thinking they've made it." I felt the smile on my face stiffen. It doesn't change anything, I said quietly. I just wanted to share the good news. My mother's tone softened a little, but her eyes were still cool. Well, you've done well. I just hope you remember where home is. My father chuckled under his breath, not looking up. Your mother's just saying she misses you. I forced a laugh. Sure, dinner went on, but I barely tasted anything. The conversation drifted to Vanessa's kids, then to the neighbor's new boat, and I sat there invisible again like I always had been. When I excused myself, Mom followed me to the door. You're leaving already? She asked. It's a long drive back. Early meeting tomorrow. She leaned against the doorframe, her perfume thick in the air. You've always been ambitious. Just don't forget family when you're chasing the next big thing. I smiled faintly. I'll call you soon. Outside, the evening air was cool and smelled like salt and jasmine. I walked to my car, the lights from their windows glowing warm behind me. For a second, I stood there watching the silhouettes move inside and laughter rising faintly through the glass. It should have felt comforting. Instead, it felt like I was staring at a scene I no longer belonged to. As I drove back down the highway, the ocean beside me glittered under the moonlight. My phone buzzed. A message from Caroline Champagne tomorrow. No excuses. I smiled, set the phone face down and focused on the road ahead. The waves crashed rhythmically in the dark, and for the first time that night, I let myself breathe. The lights of Santa Barbara faded behind me, and somewhere between the sound of the sea and the hum of the tires, the thought crept in quietly. Why did happiness always feel lonelier when you had no one to share it with? The next few weeks flew by in a blur of deadlines and client calls. My office was already strung with cheap tinsel, and someone had started a Christmas playlist that looped Mariah Carey at least twice an hour. It was early November when my phone began buzzing across my desk in the middle of a Zoom meeting. I muted myself and glanced at the screen. Mom. 3 missed calls in a row. When the meeting ended, I sighed and called her back. Madison. Her voice was bright, too bright. I've been trying to reach you. I wanted to talk about Christmas this year. I leaned back in my chair. Hi, Mom. What about Christmas? Well, she said, drawing out the word like she was unveiling something spectacular. I found this design company that decorates homes professionally. They do these incredible luxury setups. One of their packages even has a real gold-plated Christmas tree. It would look stunning in the living room. You should see the pictures. I blinked. A gold-plated Christmas tree. Are you serious? It's beautiful. And it's not like it's solid gold, she said quickly. It's just coated. You know, elegant but tasteful. I want our home to really shine this year, especially with everyone coming over. It's $5,000, but it's worth every penny. 5,000, I repeated, trying to keep my voice calm. Mom, Don't start, she interrupted gently. I know it sounds like a lot, but this would be something special. A statement piece. You're the only one who can really make this happen. I pinched the bridge of my nose. Mom, I'm already covering a few things for the holidays, remember? The wine, the catering. Oh, sweetheart, she said, cutting me off again. You've been so successful. I'm not asking you to pay for everything, just this one thing. You know your father's been cutting back and Vanessa has her kids to think about. It's just easier if you handle it. It's not like I'm asking for a car. I stared at the pile of papers on my desk, the quarterly reports that still needed my signature, and felt the pressure building behind my eyes. Let me think about it, I said finally. Of course, darling, she replied, sounding confident. I'd say yes. You've always had such a generous heart. Call me back tonight. I hung up and sat there for a moment staring at the muted city skyline through the window. $5,000 wasn't going to break me. But it wasn't about the money. At least not entirely. It was the way she said it, the assumption that my success automatically belonged to her. That evening, I met Caroline at a cafe downtown. She was already at our usual table laptop, open a cinnamon latte in front of her. You look like someone who just read a 12-page email from hell, she said, closing her laptop. Try 5 phone calls from my mother, I said, taking the seat across from her. Caroline raised an eyebrow. What's she after this time a Christmas tree? Gold-plated. $5,000. Caroline nearly choked on her drink. You're joking. I wish. She says it's to make the house look special. She means to make herself look special, Caroline said flatly. And you're thinking about paying for it. I frowned. It's just, if I say no, she'll make me feel like I'm being selfish. You know how she is. Yeah, Caroline said, stirring her coffee slowly. And if you say yes, she'll learn that guilt works. You've got to decide what lesson you want her to take away. I stared down at my cup. The foam had already started to collapse. She's my mom, Caro. I can't just... You can, she said softly. You just haven't tried yet. We sat in silence for a while, the sound of the espresso machine hissing in the background. Outside, people passed by, wrapped in coats, laughing, carrying shopping bags. It looked easy for them. Holidays, family love. When I got home, I dropped my keys on the counter and saw the unopened email from HR sitting in my inbox. Year-end bonus notification. I clicked it open. The number made me blink, larger than I expected, almost double last year's. For a moment, I smiled. Then I thought about the phone call, about my mother's tone, the way she said I was the only one who could help. I opened my banking app. My thumb hovered over the screen. I told myself it wasn't a big deal. $5,000. I made more than that in a week now. I'd still have my savings, still afford my mortgage, still take the trip to New York I'd been planning. I typed the amount, hesitated for one last second, then pressed transfer 5,000. Evelyn Cole. The confirmation message popped up instantly. Transaction successful. A strange quiet settled over me. Relief, maybe, or guilt, maybe both. I poured myself a glass of wine and stood by the window, watching the city lights blink on. Somewhere across the street, a family was putting up their Christmas decorations, their laughter spilling out into the cold night air. For the first time, I noticed how the lights reflected off the glass in front of me. Soft, warm, comforting, and yet they didn't reach me. I pressed my hand against the window pane, feeling the chill seep through, and whispered mostly to myself, maybe she just wants Christmas to be nice. I finished the wine, closed the blinds, and shut off my phone. But even in the dark, I could still see the golden tree in my mind. Shining, perfect, expensive, and I couldn't tell if it belonged to my mother or to the guilt she'd just sold me. 2 weeks before Christmas, I drove up to my parents' house in Santa Monica, the sky still pale from the morning haze. I parked in the driveway and could already hear music coming from inside. Instrumental carols, the kind you hear in department stores. The moment I stepped through the front door, a heavy mix of pine and perfume hit me. Not the soft, comforting scent of real pine needles, but the artificial sweetness of something expensive, trying to smell like joy. And then I saw it. The tree stood in the middle of the living room, like a monument, 12 feet tall, its branches dripping in gold ribbon and glass ornaments that glittered under the recessed lights. The star on top was silver and massive, catching every beam, until it looked like the sun had decided to take up residence in our house. Mom stood nearby, waving her manicured hands at 2 young men in black shirts. No angle. That garland higher, she said. It needs to frame the star, not compete with it. She noticed me standing there and lit up like the tree itself. Madison. Isn't it stunning? This is going to be the centerpiece of the entire party. People will talk about it for weeks. I managed a small smile. It's big. Elegant, she corrected. Not big, elegant. You can't put a price on beauty. I glanced at the invoice sitting on the marble console table, $4,950. She followed my eyes and laughed softly. Worth every cent, she said, tapping the paper. This is what the holidays are supposed to feel like. Classy, memorable. I wanted to tell her that no, this wasn't what the holidays were supposed to feel like. That it smelled more like money than love. That it felt colder than the breeze coming through the window. But instead I said, "It's very memorable, Mom." Before I could say more, the doorbell rang. A couple from next door walked in carrying a tray of cookies and gasping as soon as they saw the tree. "Oh, Evelyn, it's magnificent," the woman said. "Did you do all this yourself?" Mom's hand slipped easily onto my shoulder. "Oh no," she said with a modest laugh. "My daughter Madison made this possible. She's done so well for herself. She insisted on paying for everything." I froze for a second, then forced a polite smile, as both neighbors turned toward me, nodding in approval. "That's so generous of you," the man said. I murmured a quick thank you and stepped back, pretending to check my phone. By evening, the house was full. The caterers had set up tables in the backyard, the string lights reflected off champagne glasses, and soft jazz played from hidden speakers. Everywhere I looked, people were laughing, posing for photos beside the golden tree. My mother floated through the room like a hostess on a magazine cover. Her laughter perfectly timed her compliments effortless. She stopped next to a group of her friends and said loudly, I told Madison that nothing brings family together like investing in something beautiful. I took my glass of wine and moved to the far corner near the fireplace. The warmth from the fire barely reached me. From across the room, my father caught my eye. He made his way over, holding his own drink. "She does love a good audience," he said quietly, nodding toward Mom. "She's in her element," I replied. He chuckled. "Your mother's been this way since we married. If no one's watching, it's like it doesn't count." I looked at him, studying the lines around his eyes, the tired slump of his shoulders. "Doesn't that ever exhaust you, Dad?" I asked. He took a slow sip of his whiskey, eyes fixed on the fire. "You get used to it," he said. "Arguing doesn't change anything. Might as well let her have her way." Something in his tone made me sadder than I expected. "That sounds lonely," I said. He didn't answer. He just gave a small shrug and walked away, leaving behind the faint scent of bourbon and resignation. The night stretched on. Mom kept introducing me to people I barely remembered from my childhood. Her friends, her clients, the realtor who helped them refinance. Each introduction came with the same tagline. "My daughter, the one who paid for the tree." Every time she said it, I felt smaller, like my worth had been reduced to a receipt on the table. When the last guests began to leave, I found myself helping one of the staff pack up the extra plates. Mom floated by, kissing cheeks, accepting compliments. "You've outdone yourself again," someone told her. She laughed, modest and triumphant all at once. I slipped away quietly, grabbing my coat from the hallway closet. The air outside was sharp and cold. From the driveway, I turned back to look at the house. Every window glowed the gold lights flickering inside like a heartbeat. It should have looked warm. Instead, it looked theatrical. Too bright, too polished, too empty. I stood there for a moment, keys in hand, thinking about the $5,000. Not the amount itself, but what it had bought. A show, a story, an image. My mother's perfect holiday. My absence of peace. As I got into my car, I could still hear laughter echoing from inside, muffled by the walls, but loud enough to sting. I started the engine and sat there, hands gripping the steering wheel, watching the house shimmer in the rearview mirror. For a second, I thought about going back in saying something honest, telling her that it hurt to see my generosity turned into performance. But I didn't. I just sat there watching the lights blur until they looked like fire. When I finally drove away, the reflection of that golden tree followed me down the street, glowing faintly in the mirror until it disappeared around the corner. I didn't feel proud or angry, just hollow, like I'd paid for a ticket to a play I wasn't allowed to star in. By spring, work had swallowed my days. New campaigns, new deadlines, new clients who wanted to reinvent themselves before summer. My calendar was full, my phone constantly buzzing, and my apartment was starting to look more like a storage unit than a home. I barely noticed the seasons changing until my mother's name flashed on my screen again. "Madison," she said, her tone syrupy and cheerful. "I've been thinking about my birthday next month. I want to do something special this year. A proper dinner party. Not too big, maybe 20 people. I've already reserved the venue. Could you help out a little with the costs?" Just a small contribution. I paused, my pen still hovering over a notepad filled with client notes. "How much are we talking, Mom?" "Oh, nothing crazy," she said quickly, which I knew meant the opposite. "Around 800 should cover the decorations and the cake." 800 for a cake, I said, trying not to sound exasperated. "Well, not just the cake," she corrected. "Presentation matters. You know how people talk. Anyway, I knew you'd want to make it special." I closed my eyes for a moment and rubbed my temples. "I'll see what I can do." "That's my girl," she said, already satisfied. "You've always been so thoughtful." I hung up and stared at the phone. The compliment didn't land. It felt like another small invoice disguised as affection. A few weeks later, Easter rolled around. The phone rang again. "Sweetheart, we're hosting brunch this year," Mom said. "We've invited the Johnsons and a few of your father's clients. I found this amazing French champagne, but it's a little pricey. Could you send a few hundred for that?" I tried to laugh. "Do you guys ever just cook at home anymore?" "Don't be silly," she said. "This is tradition. People expect a certain standard from us." I thought about saying no. I really did. But I didn't want to start another argument, so I sent the money. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about how every phone call from my mother now came with a dollar amount attached. There was never a "how are you" or "do you need anything?" Just one transaction after another. By summer, I stopped answering right away. I told myself I was too busy, and maybe I was, but deep down I knew I was avoiding her. Then, in early November, I realized I hadn't heard from anyone about Thanksgiving. It used to be my favorite holiday, the one time we actually sat around a table and laughed like a family. I picked up my phone and texted her first. "Hey, what's the plan for Thanksgiving this year?" The reply came a few hours later. "Hi, honey. We're doing something small this year. Just a few friends and some of your dad's old colleagues. Seating's a little tight, so don't worry about coming. You deserve to rest after such a busy year. Love you." I read it twice. My thumb hovered over the screen. I typed, "Got it. Have a great dinner," then deleted it. Typed, "Okay." Mom deleted that too. Finally, I just put the phone face down. That night, I opened the freezer and found a turkey breast I'd bought the year before. The same one I'd meant to bring to her house, but never got the chance to cook. I put it in the oven without really knowing why. The smell filled the apartment, but it didn't feel like Thanksgiving. It smelled like failure, like the leftovers of something that used to matter. When it was done, I sat on the couch with a plate in my lap, the TV flickering in front of me. A rerun of some old sitcom played in the background, canned laughter, bright colors, fake joy. I looked at the framed photo on the wall, me mom, dad, and Vanessa on the Santa Monica Pier when I was maybe 12. We were all smiling, sunburned, holding cotton candy. I remembered that day vividly. Dad had lost his wallet, and Mom had scolded him for an hour, but we'd still ended up laughing by sunset. Back when things still felt simple. My phone buzzed again this time from Caroline. "You okay tonight?" she asked. "We're baking pies and talking trash about our families. Want to join?" I stared at the message for a while. The image of her warm kitchen, the laughter, the smell of sugar and butter was comforting, but something inside me felt too heavy to move. I typed back, "Thanks, but I'm fine. Just catching up on work." She replied with a heart emoji, then nothing else. I turned the TV volume up, hoping to drown out the silence. Outside, through the thin apartment walls, I could hear my neighbor's laughter, the faint sound of clinking glasses. The kind of background noise that comes from people who belong somewhere. I chewed the last bite of turkey and set the plate down on the coffee table. The TV laugh track rolled on out of sync with everything I felt. The smell of roasted meat hung in the air, mingling with the faint hum of the refrigerator. For a while, I just sat there, staring at the frozen image on the TV screen after the credits ended. The apartment was warm, the lights soft, but the quiet pressed down on me until it was almost unbearable. I looked over at the family photo again and whispered to the empty room, "I don't think I belong there anymore." Outside, the sound of my neighbors laughing drifted through the open window, mixing with the faint hum of the television. I turned up the volume not to watch, just to fill the space with something other than the sound of being alone. By December, the city was glowing again. String lights tangled through palm trees, fake snow sprayed across store windows, every restaurant playing the same holiday playlist on repeat. At work, people traded Secret Santa gifts and planned weekend trips to see family. I told everyone I was staying local, pretending it was by choice. When I got home one Friday night, my mailbox was stuffed with holiday cards. Red and green envelopes, gold calligraphy photos of smiling families in matching sweaters. I carried them inside, dropped them on the kitchen counter, and flipped through one by one. From coworkers, from college friends, even from my dentist. But not one from my parents. I tried not to care. I poured myself a glass of wine, sat at the kitchen island, and unlocked my phone. The first post that popped up on Instagram made my stomach clench. It was my mother. A photo of her dad, Vanessa, and the kids standing proudly beside last year's gold tree, still as shiny and obnoxious as ever. The caption read, "Grateful for those who truly understand the meaning of family." The room tilted for a second. I put the phone face down on the counter, but the image burned into my brain anyway. I didn't cry right away. I just sat there staring at the blank wall across from me, feeling that familiar mix of anger and shame. Then slowly the tears came. Silent, hot, unstoppable. I slid down onto the kitchen floor, still holding my wine glass. The tile was cold beneath me, grounding. The refrigerator hummed softly in the background like a reminder that the world kept going, whether I could or not. A soft knock broke the silence. I froze, wiping at my eyes. Then a voice came through the door, warm and lilting. "Madison. Are you home, Querida?" It was Mrs. Gomez, my neighbor from across the hall. She'd lived there for years, a retired teacher with sharp eyes, and the kind of patience only life could teach. When I opened the door, she stood there holding a tray covered in foil. The smell of baked apples and cinnamon floated into the hallway. "I saw your lights were off," she said, lifting the tray slightly. "You shouldn't be alone on a Friday. I made too much pie. Come eat a little with me." I tried to smile. "That's kind of you, but I don't want to intrude." "Bah," she said, waving a hand. "If you were intruding, I wouldn't have come knocking. Come on, Nina, you can't say no to pie." I hesitated, then followed her across the hall. Her apartment was small and cozy, filled with plants and photos. Grandchildren, old students, a younger version of her standing beside a man in uniform. She lit a candle in the center of the table, and the soft glow filled the room. "Sit," she said, slicing 2 generous pieces. "Tell me what's made those eyes of yours so sad." I took a bite of pie, still warm, sweet enough to make me close my eyes. "It's nothing, really," I said after a moment. "Just family stuff." She tilted her head. Family stuff always means something. The words spilled out before I could stop them. I told her about my parents, about the money, about the endless holidays that felt more like performances than celebrations, about how they'd stopped inviting me and how I'd convinced myself it didn't matter. But it did. Mrs. Gomez listened quietly, nodding occasionally, her hands wrapped around her mug of tea. When I finished, she sighed. "Mi amor, you are not selfish," she said softly. "You are just tired. There's a difference." I blinked back new tears. "It doesn't feel like a difference. That's because you were raised to believe love must be earned. But love given with conditions isn't love at all. It's control." Her words settled over me like a blanket. Warm, uncomfortable, but true. We sat in silence for a while, the candle flickering between us. Outside, the muffled sounds of laughter and car horns drifted in through the window. Mrs. Gomez reached over and patted my hand. "Listen to me, Madison. Sometimes loving someone means stepping back so you can breathe. You can forgive from a distance." I nodded, unable to speak. She smiled, her wrinkles deepening. "Good. Now drink your tea before it gets cold." Stayed there for another hour, listening to her stories about growing up in New Mexico, about her own mother, who never learned to say, "I'm proud of you," out loud. It was strange how her stories felt like mirrors, showing me pieces of myself I hadn't wanted to see. When I finally went home, the hallway was quiet. I set the empty pie plate on the counter and opened my journal. The pages had been blank for months. I picked up a pen and wrote slowly, the words forming before I could think too much about them. I have spent my life trying to please people who only loved me when I gave them something. I've confused compliance with kindness and silence with peace. I don't want to live like that anymore. The clock ticked softly in the background. I closed the journal, turned off the lights, and walked to the window. Outside, the ocean was a dark blur, its rhythm steady and endless. I could hear the faint crash of waves somewhere in the distance. I crawled into bed and let the sound carry me, breathing deep until my chest no longer felt tight. Before sleep came, I whispered into the dark, "I'm done apologizing for wanting peace." By January, my life had settled into a rhythm that didn't involve family calls or guilt. Work filled the space they left behind, and I told myself that was enough. Coastal Reach Media had just landed a massive contract with a luxury skincare brand, and Alan Pierce, our CEO, gathered the team in the glass conference room overlooking downtown San Diego. "All right, everyone," Alan said, pacing like a man who thrived on caffeine and chaos. "This campaign is called Pure Light. The client wants something fresh, aspirational, modern. Madison. You'll be leading creative direction." The room buzzed for a second before quieting. Across the table, Chris leaned back in his chair, smirking. "Pure Light. Huh, seems fitting. Madison always finds a way to shine." There was a ripple of awkward laughter. I smiled thinly. "Thanks, Chris. I'll make sure we all shine, not just me." He shrugged. "Hey, no pressure. You were probably chosen because you know how to talk to the big bosses." Alan's eyes flicked to him, but he didn't say anything. It didn't matter. I was used to that kind of dig. I'd heard versions of it my whole life. When the meeting ended, I gathered my notes and walked out. Caroline caught up to me near the elevators. "You gonna let him get under your skin?" she asked. I shook my head. "He's background noise." "Good," she said. "Just don't let the noise get too loud." The next few weeks were a blur of long nights and early mornings. My apartment became little more than a place to change clothes. and recharge my laptop. I built decks, reviewed mock-ups, and pitched ideas to clients who changed their minds every 24 hours. The campaign demanded everything: energy, focus, creativity, and I gave it all. On the surface, it looked like ambition. In truth, it was survival. I needed to prove, to myself, to everyone, that I wasn't who my mother thought I was, someone whose worth depended on what she gave away. One Wednesday, after a 12-hour day, I was in the office kitchen making instant coffee when Chris walked in. "Still here?" he asked. Trying to impress Pierce, I didn't look up. Trying to do my job. He laughed. "Relax, Madison. You don't have to outwork all of us to prove you belong here." I stirred the coffee slowly. Funny, I thought that's exactly what women have to do. He raised his hands, mock surrender. Touché. Then softer. "Don't burn yourself out." I didn't answer. Burnout was a luxury. People who had safety nets could afford to stop. 2 days later, we had the big internal review. I walked into the boardroom with a binder full of data and a vision board pinned to foam core. The lights dimmed as I presented, clean visuals, strong copy, and emotional story about self-worth and confidence. When I finished, the room was quiet for a beat too long. Then Chris cleared his throat. "I like the concept," he said slowly, "but I think it might be a bit too feminine. We don't want to alienate half the audience." I smiled, keeping my tone even. "Chris, 80% of the client's consumers are women. The other 20% are men buying gifts for them. If we make it generic, we lose the heart of the brand." He opened his mouth again, but Alan cut him off. "She's right. The data backs it. Keep it as is." The meeting continued, but I felt a quiet shift. For once, no one doubted me. No one overruled me. By the time I got back to my desk, Caroline was waiting with a grin. "You just shut him down so hard the air conditioning paused." I laughed for the first time in days. "I'll buy you lunch for that one." Weeks passed and the campaign launched. Billboards went up across Los Angeles. Soft gold hues, the tagline, "Pure light, pure you." The engagement numbers broke company records within a week. Alan called me into his office the following Friday. "Madison," he said, leaning back in his chair with a rare smile, "you're the reason this campaign works. You understood the client, the audience, and the emotion behind it. I owe you one." I felt something tighten and release inside me at once. "Thank you," I said quietly. He nodded. "Take a few days off. You've earned it." That night, I stayed late anyway. When the office finally emptied, I went to the women's restroom and splashed water on my face. My reflection stared back. Tired eyes, faint circles, but alive in a way I hadn't been in months. For the first time in a long time, the voice in my head wasn't my mother's. It wasn't telling me to do more to prove myself to pay for love. It was quiet, still, mine. I leaned against the counter and smiled at my reflection, not the polite corporate smile I wore in meetings, but something small and real. When I got home that night, the city was dark and still the ocean wind sharp against my face. I opened my journal, flipped past the old entries full of apologies and wrote, "I'm not afraid of being doubted anymore. I'm afraid of believing the doubts they plant in me." I closed the book. Exhaled and let the silence fill the room. For once, it didn't feel empty. It felt earned. 6 months after the Pure Light campaign, my face was everywhere. Coastal Reach had used my name in press releases, and a local business magazine ran a feature calling me the woman redefining authentic branding. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it just felt quiet. The morning after the article went live, my phone rang while I was making coffee. I almost didn't answer when I saw her name. Madison. My mother's voice sang through the line, syrupy sweet. "I saw the article. I'm so proud of you, darling. I showed it to everyone at the club." I froze mid-pour. "You read it?" "Of course, everyone's been talking about it. You've done so well for yourself. We're all so proud. I waited for the but. It came. Actually, speaking of celebrations," she continued, "we're planning a summer garden party. Just family, a few close friends. It would mean so much if you came home. We want to celebrate together like old times." Her tone was soft, like she was offering a peace treaty wrapped in ribbon. I set the coffee cup down slowly. "Like old times?" I asked. "You mean the old times where you uninvited me from Christmas?" There was a pause. "Oh, Madison, don't be dramatic. That was months ago. Families fight. It's normal. You can't still be holding a grudge. I'm not holding a grudge, Mom. I'm holding boundaries." Her laugh was light, almost dismissive. "You're always so serious. Come home for one night. You're still my daughter." I took a deep breath. "I have work." I'm busy. Too busy for your family, she said, voice tightening. Too busy for manipulation, I said before I could stop myself. Then I hung up. The next few days were packed with meetings, but something about that call sat heavy in my chest. On Thursday morning, I was clearing emails when one caught my eye. The subject line read, Account Verification Commercial Loan, Clark Holiday Events. I frowned, clicked it open, and my blood ran cold. Dear Ms. Cole, this email confirms your co-signature on the $50,000 business loan for Clark Holiday Events. Please contact us if there are discrepancies. My hands went numb. I reread the line 3 times, certain I was misunderstanding something. I hadn't signed anything. I didn't even know what Clark Holiday Events was. I called the bank immediately. The representative, polite but detached, confirmed that a loan had indeed been processed, complete with my electronic signature and a scanned ID. We verified the details through your mother's business contact, she said. My mother. My voice cracked. Yes, ma'am, Evelyn Cole. She's listed as the primary account holder. I hung up and sat completely still. The hum of my laptop, the faint sound of traffic outside, everything felt distant. I stared at my reflection in the black screen, my own name, my credit, my reputation, used without a word to me. After a few long minutes, I picked up my phone and called Daniel. He answered on the second ring, his voice groggy. Hey, Madison, what's going on? Do you know anything about a company called Clark Holiday Events? I asked, my voice shaking. There was a pause. Yeah, I've heard about it. Your mom mentioned something about starting an event service, holiday decorating, catering, stuff like that. Why? Because apparently I co-signed a $50,000 loan for it. He sighed heavily. Oh shit, I thought you knew what your parents said you agreed to help. They told me you were okay with them using your name to boost credibility with the lender. I assumed you'd approved it. I laughed once, sharp and humorless. So now they're using me as collateral, Madison. I'm sorry. I didn't realize they hadn't told you. They said it was just paperwork formality. Formality. I repeated, my voice going flat. They forged my signature, Daniel. He was quiet for a moment. You know your mom. She doesn't think of these things the way we do. No, she doesn't, I said. She thinks rules are suggestions. When I hung up, I sat there for a long time staring at the city skyline through my window. I thought I'd already hit the limit of what I could forgive, but somehow they'd found a new way to cross the line. I called my mother next. She answered on the first ring, as if she'd been waiting. Madison. I was just about to call you. Did you take out a loan in my name? She hesitated, then said lightly, Oh, that. Don't be so dramatic. We didn't take it in your name. We just used your signature to co-sign. It's the same thing banks do all the time. It's perfectly safe. Perfectly safe, Mom, that's fraud. Don't use that word, she snapped. It's not fraud. We're family. You'll get your credit back when the loan's paid off. It's no big deal. No big deal, I said, my voice rising. You forged my name for $50,000. You could ruin my record, my job, everything I've worked for. Her tone hardened. I said I'll pay it back. You act like I stole from you. I closed my eyes, fighting the anger clawing at my throat. You did, Mom. You just didn't take the kind of thing that shows up in a wallet. Silence. Then coldly, I think you're overreacting. You've changed, Madison. Money's made you selfish. I let out a laugh, sharp and tired. No, Mom. You did that. You taught me what selfish looks like. There was a long pause, then she said, quieter now. You'll thank me one day. You wouldn't have the life you do without us. I'll thank you when you stop using me as your safety net. I hung up. That night I met Caroline at a small bar downtown. She could tell something was wrong the second I walked in. Talk, she said, sliding a glass of whiskey toward me. They forged my name. I said the words, tasting bitter. A $50,000 loan. I could lose everything if this goes wrong. Caroline's expression hardened. Jesus, are you pressing charges? I don't know yet, I said quietly. They're my parents. Parents or not, they crossed a line. I stared into my drink. They always cross lines. I just keep redrawing them. Caroline leaned closer. Then maybe it's time you stop drawing and start building a wall. I nodded slowly, the truth of it settling in my chest. For the first time I wasn't scared. I was done being scared. That night I spread the paperwork across my kitchen table. Bank emails, identification scans, timelines. The evidence was clear. I opened my laptop and typed a name into the search bar. Financial Identity Attorney San Diego. For once, I wasn't acting out of guilt or obligation. I was acting out of self-respect. It was time to protect what was mine. The next morning, I called Daniel and asked him to meet me at a cafe near his office. He looked nervous when he arrived, like he already knew what I was going to say. I need your help, I told him. Not as family, as someone who understands how these things work. He nodded, leaning forward. What do you need? I want proof that Clark Holiday Events is fake. I want to see every document my parents filed. Daniel hesitated. You realize this is going to blow up, right? Once you bring in lawyers, there's no turning back. I met his eyes. There's nothing left to turn back to. We spent the afternoon combing through public records and business registries. It didn't take long to find what I suspected. The company existed only on paper. No employees, no physical address, no tax ID. Just a name and empty P.O. box, and my forged signature listed as a cosigner. The loan funds had gone directly into my parents' joint account. When I saw the documents printed out in front of me, my hands shook. Daniel looked away. I'm sorry, Madison, he said quietly. I wish I'd asked questions sooner. It's not your fault, I said. They've been doing this to everyone for years. I just didn't want to see it. 2 days later, I sat in a law office in downtown San Diego. The air smelled like disinfectant and old paper. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead. Across from me sat a woman in a charcoal gray suit, her nameplate reading Rachel Lynn, attorney at law. She listened as I explained everything, from the family tension to the forged documents. When I finished, she folded her hands neatly on the desk. Ms. Cole, she said, what your parents did qualifies as identity fraud and forgery. Whether or not their family doesn't change that. You have every right to take legal action. The words felt heavy, almost unreal. I don't want to put them in prison, I said, my voice breaking a little. I just want them to stop using me like I'm their property. Rachel's expression softened. Then we'll keep it civil, at least at first. You can file a cease and desist and a claim of identity misuse. That protects your credit and clears your name. I nodded. Do it. As I signed the paperwork, ironically this time with my real signature, I felt a tremor run through me. Fear, sadness, relief. A strange combination of all three. By the end of the week, the court had issued official notices. A summons was sent to my parents' address in Santa Monica. The phone call came that night, Madison. My mother's voice was high-pitched, panicked. What have you done? A man just came to our door with legal papers. Are you insane? You're making a fool of us in front of the entire neighborhood. I took a slow breath. I didn't make a fool of anyone, Mom. I'm just protecting myself. You're destroying this family, she snapped. Do you know how humiliating this is? People will talk. Your father's business contacts? Your business contacts aren't my problem, I said evenly. I warned you. You used my name without permission. This is what happens. You've always been dramatic, she said, her voice trembling now. I did this for you. For all of us. You think money just appears out of nowhere. Maybe not, I said quietly, but honesty shouldn't disappear with it. She was silent for a long time before whispering, I can't believe you'd do this to your own mother. And then she hung up. Days turned into weeks. I buried myself in work, trying not to check my email every 5 minutes for updates from the court. Caroline was my anchor through all of it. She dropped by my apartment one night with takeout and 2 bottles of wine. How are you holding up? She asked, kicking off her shoes. I'm fine. I lied. She handed me a glass. You're not fine. You're shaking. I looked down at my hands. She was right. I keep wondering if I went too far, I admitted. If maybe I should have just let it go. Madison, she said firmly, they stole from you. They lied to you. You didn't go too far. You finally stopped letting them walk all over you. I nodded, but the guilt still gnawed at me. Family had always been my weak spot, the word that kept me tethered to pain. A week later, the story broke online. A journalist named Harper Fields, barely out of college with a blog that specialized in local scandals, published an exposé titled, Golden Tree Family Turns Holiday Spirit into Scandal. It detailed everything, the fake business, the forged signature, even the infamous $5,000 gold Christmas tree. There was a photo of my parents' living room from last year, glittering and ridiculous. By the next morning, the article had been shared hundreds of times. Someone even posted the old photo on Twitter with the caption, Money can't buy class, but apparently it can buy fraud. I stared at my phone half in disbelief, half horrified. My phone started ringing before noon. Reporters, relatives, even old classmates who hadn't spoken to me in years. Then came the inevitable call from my mother. Her voice was raw, panicked. "Madison, you have to stop this. That girl's article, it's everywhere. I can't go to the store without people whispering." "I didn't talk to her," I said calmly. She found the records herself. "Don't play innocent," she cried. "You humiliated us. Your father's hiding in his office. Vanessa won't answer my calls. Is that what you wanted?" I hesitated. I wanted the truth. "You've ruined us," she said, voice cracking. "Everything we built, gone. You're just like them now, the people who tear others down to feel better." Before I could respond, she hung up. Later that evening, Vanessa called me. "She's been crying all day," my sister said. "I didn't write the article, Ness." "I know," she said softly. "But you started the fire." "Maybe the fire was already burning," I said. "I just stopped pretending it was candlelight." She didn't answer. 2 weeks later, the investigation was complete. The loan was nullified. My name was cleared. The attorney sent me a brief email. "Case resolved. No liability." I read it 3 times. Then leaned back in my chair, staring out at the skyline. The city looked peaceful from up here, the kind of peace that came after a storm. Not quiet because nothing happened, but quiet because everything had. That night, Caroline came over with takeout again. She lifted her glass toward me. "To justice," she said. I smiled faintly. Justice doesn't always need a crowd. Outside, the city lights flickered across the glass, reflecting like 1,000 small truths. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was waiting for approval or forgiveness, just stillness. And that was enough. The first time I walked into the condo, the real estate agent was still talking about property values and square footage, but I barely heard her. The view did all the talking. The entire western wall was glass, floor to ceiling, spilling sunlight across the sand-colored floors. Beyond the balcony, the Pacific shimmered like something alive, waves curling in slow rhythm against the shore of La Jolla. "This one's listed at $1 million flat," the agent said, handing me a glossy brochure. 2 bedrooms, 2 baths, corner unit. These don't stay on the market long. I didn't need the pitch. I knew. The next week it was mine. The day I moved in, the sky was clear and impossibly blue. Caroline helped me haul boxes up the elevator, her hair tied in a messy bun. Sweat dripping down her forehead. "For someone who doesn't hoard," she said, grunting as she set a box down. "You sure own a lot of books." "I threw half of them away," I said, out of breath. "Then you had too many to begin with." She collapsed onto the couch cushion that hadn't yet found its frame. "But seriously, Maddie, this place is incredible." I'd chosen every detail myself. The walls were soft cream, the floors warm oak. I'd picked out a leather sofa the color of burnt caramel and a solid walnut coffee table that still smelled like the forest it came from. A small green fig tree stood in the corner by the window, its leaves catching sunlight like tiny mirrors. Mrs. Gomez came by later that afternoon, carrying a basket wrapped in cellophane. "For your new home," she said proudly. Inside were homemade cookies, a candle, and a tiny ceramic bird. "For good luck and peace." I hugged her tightly. "You didn't have to." "Shh, don't argue with an old woman's traditions." She looked around the condo, her eyes soft. "It's beautiful, Madison. Peaceful. You did well." Caroline opened a bottle of champagne she'd been saving since my promotion. We used mismatched mugs instead of glasses and toasted standing by the window. "To new beginnings," she said. "To fewer emergencies," I added. She laughed. "That too." We spent the rest of the afternoon unpacking. Every box I opened felt like shedding another layer of my old life. Photos, books, trinkets I'd once used to make apartments feel temporary. This place didn't need pretending. As the sun began to dip, I hung a single framed painting on the wall opposite the windows. A landscape in muted blues and golds. A gift I'd bought for myself years ago, but never had the courage to hang. It looked right here. I stepped back and whispered, "This is my home. No one else gets to claim it." Mrs. Gomez, who had stayed to help fold packing paper, smiled knowingly. "You didn't buy a condo, Querida. You bought your peace." I turned to her, smiling. "Then it was worth every penny." She nodded, approving. "Keep it full of laughter, not noise." When they both left that evening, I poured a second glass of champagne and stood by the window, the city lights glowing below. The air smelled like salt and rain. I opened my laptop, clicked open Instagram, and uploaded a photo of the living room. The warm light, the ocean view reflected in the glass. The caption read, "New home, new peace." Notifications started flooding in almost immediately. Caroline commented, "Finally, our empire begins." A few coworkers left hearts and clapping emojis. Even some distant relatives chimed in with generic congratulations. Then after a few minutes, I saw it. A small red heart left by Evelyn Cole. No words, just that quiet, meaningless gesture. I stared at it for a moment. My thumb hovered over the screen, the familiar sting of guilt pressing at the back of my throat. Then I scrolled past it and didn't look again. Later that night, Caroline texted me. "So when's the housewarming? We have to do this properly." I hesitated before replying. "Soon. But only people I actually want here." She sent a thumbs up emoji. "Good. I'll make the guest list." When I set the phone down, I realized I was smiling. Not the polite kind I wore in front of clients or family gatherings. The real one, the quiet kind that comes from relief. I walked through the condo slowly, letting the sound of the ocean fill the silence. Every step echoed faintly against the hardwood, a rhythm that felt like my own heartbeat. The sky outside turned navy, the horizon glowing with the last trace of sunset. I opened the balcony door and the wind swept in, cool, salty, alive. Somewhere below, a surfer shouted something I couldn't make out, laughter following after him. I leaned against the railing and whispered to no one I'm home. For the first time in years, the word didn't hurt. Inside, the faint light from the kitchen lamp reflected on the walls like liquid gold. I turned off the last box light curled up on the sofa and let the hum of the waves drown out everything else. Tomorrow, I'd start planning the housewarming. One night. Just friends, colleagues, maybe Mrs. Gomez. A celebration of something that wasn't about appearances or image, just presence. I pulled a blanket over my shoulders and closed my eyes. The condo was silent except for the sound of the ocean and the faint creak of the building settling. It didn't feel lonely. It felt earned. The day of the housewarming was so bright it almost felt staged. Sunlight pouring through the glass walls, the air thick with salt and laughter. Caroline had been there since noon, setting up everything like an event planner. The kitchen island was covered in charcuterie champagne flutes and trays of pastries from a local bakery. Smooth jazz played from the speakers, the kind of sound that wrapped around the hum of conversation without interrupting it. Guests trickled in, co-workers from Coastal Reach, a few friends from college, and Mrs. Gomez in a navy dress that made her look like she was attending an awards dinner. Uncle Ray and Aunt Donna arrived last, carrying a brown paper bag of their own roasted coffee. "For your mornings in paradise," Uncle Ray said, grinning as he handed it over. "Thank you," I said, hugging them both. "It smells like heaven." The party filled every corner of the condo. People leaned against the balcony railing glasses, catching the sunlight, voices overlapping in soft, happy waves. I moved from group to group, answering questions about the view, the furniture, the ridiculous parking prices in La Jolla. At one point, Alan Pierce, the CEO himself, showed up shaking my hand like a proud uncle. "This place is incredible, Madison. You really know how to make a statement." I laughed. "Let's just say I had a good campaign bonus." He smiled, glancing at the ocean. "You've earned it." That was when the doorbell rang. It wasn't the soft, polite chime of the intercom. It was the sharp, insistent ring of someone who expected to be let in. Caroline, arranging champagne glasses, looked over her shoulder. "Expecting anyone else?" "No," I said, slowly setting down my drink. I crossed the room, weaving past guests, and opened the door. There they were. My mother stood in front, beaming like she'd just arrived at her own premiere. Her hair was perfectly styled, her lipstick too bright for daylight. Behind her, my father shifted, uncomfortably, hands stuffed in his pockets, and Vanessa stood between them, holding a bottle of red wine like a peace offering. "Madison," Mom exclaimed, "we're here to celebrate you. I didn't move. Mom, I didn't invite you." She laughed, brushing past me before I could react. "Oh, don't be silly. You think I'd miss my daughter's housewarming? That's ridiculous. Mom." Wait, but she was already halfway across the room, calling out loudly, "Everyone, look at this place. Isn't it gorgeous?" Conversation stopped, heads turned. Alan glanced at me, polite confusion in his eyes. Caroline froze, holding a tray mid-air. My mother looked around like she was inspecting a stage. "You've really outdone yourself, sweetheart," she said. $1 million apartment, I always knew you'd land on your feet. I could feel every eye in the room shifting toward me. My throat tightened.
Mom, please, stop. This isn't the time. Oh, nonsense, she said brightly, pulling her phone from her purse. We need a photo. This is such a beautiful moment. Family reunited after everything. I want to remember it. She raised her phone, switched to video, and turned slightly toward the guests. Hi, everyone, she said into the camera voice, sugary sweet.
After a few misunderstandings, the Cole family is together again. See, love always wins. Before I could move, Caroline was beside her. I'm sorry, ma'am, she said evenly, but filming here isn't allowed. This is a private event. The smile on my mother's face flickered. Excuse me, Caroline didn't flinch. Please put the phone away. My mother looked at me, then her expression hardening. You're letting your employees tell me what to do now. She's my friend, I said quietly. And she's right. Put it away. A few of the guests tried to restart conversations, but the energy had shifted. The music felt distant now, the warmth gone. My father stepped forward as if to speak, but Vanessa gently touched his arm, shaking her head. I took a slow breath, my heart pounding in my ears. Mom. You need to leave. She laughed, sharp and brittle. Are you serious? I came here to celebrate you, and now you're kicking me out. You came here uninvited, I said. Her tone rose loud enough for everyone to hear. Do you have any idea how rude you're being? After everything your father and I have done for you. I stared at her, unable to hide the exhaustion in my voice. What you've done is use me, Mom. My money, my name, my life. And when I said no, you called it betrayal. The silence that followed was heavy enough to feel physical. My mother's face flushed. You're being cruel. Do you want to embarrass me in front of all these people? No, I said evenly, setting my glass down. I want to protect this place. The same way I protected my name. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. My father looked at the floor. Vanessa's hand still tight on his sleeve. I stepped closer. Leave. Now. For a moment I thought she might slap me. Her eyes burned with fury, her lips trembling. Then she exhaled sharply, muttered something under her breath, and turned toward the door. Robert followed silent, his shoulders sagging. Vanessa lingered, her eyes meeting mine with something between shame and apology. I'm sorry, she whispered. I nodded. It's not your fault. She nodded back, then walked out after them. The door clicked shut, and for a long second no one moved. Then Caroline stepped forward, clearing her throat. Well, she said softly. That was memorable. A few nervous laughs rippled through the room, easing the tension. Alan gave me a small, respectful nod, then turned to the guests. Let's give Madison a minute. I stood there, staring at the closed door, my pulse still racing. The sunlight from the windows shimmered on the floor like ripples of gold, and in the reflection of the glass I saw myself, still standing, still breathing. Caroline came to stand beside me, her voice low. You okay? I nodded slowly. Yeah, I think I finally am. I picked up my glass again, not to drink, but to feel the weight of it in my hand. Steady, solid mine. Outside, the ocean stretched endlessly beyond the glass, calm and bright. And for the first time I felt the same way. My mother's face flushed crimson, her voice slicing through the quiet like broken glass. You've turned your back on your own blood, she hissed. After everything we've done for you, you stand there and humiliate us. No one moved. The air was so tense it felt solid. My co-workers froze, eyes darting between us. The soft jazz had stopped playing somewhere during the chaos, and all that remained was the low hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of waves outside. Mom, I said quietly. Please stop. She ignored me, stepping forward. You think money makes you better than us? You think that fancy title, this place, this performance, makes you superior? Vanessa's voice trembled. Mom, please, enough. Don't you dare take her side, my mother snapped, pointing a shaking finger at her. You've always let her get away with disrespect. Vanessa's eyes filled with tears. She's not disrespecting you. She's asking you to leave. For a second, I saw something flicker across my mother's face. Shock, maybe disbelief. But it vanished just as quickly, replaced by fury. You'll regret this, Madison, she spat.
Mark my words. One day you'll realize you've destroyed this family. I met her eyes, calm now in a way that surprised even me. No, I said softly. What destroyed this family was pretending it was whole when it wasn't. Her jaw clenched. You sound just like those people you work with. Cold, heartless. Maybe I said my voice steady, or maybe I finally stopped apologizing for wanting peace. She flinched as if I'd struck her. The room went still again. My father took a step forward, but his gaze was on the floor. "Evelyn," he murmured, "let's go." She turned on him furious. "You won't even defend me." He didn't answer. His silence was answer enough. I took a slow breath, then walked to the door. My hand found the handle cool and solid beneath my fingers. I opened it wide and turned back toward them. "You need to leave," I said clearly, my voice firm, but not loud. My mother glared at me, eyes glistening. "You're making a mistake," she said through her teeth. "You'll come crawling back." I shook my head. "No, Mom, not this time." For a moment, none of us moved. Then she finally turned her heels, clicking sharply on the hardwood. My father followed behind, shoulders slumped, eyes never leaving the floor. Vanessa lingered, hesitating in the doorway. Her voice was small. "I'm sorry, Maddie, for all of it," I nodded. "Go, Ness. It's okay." She gave me one last look, a mix of regret and relief, and stepped out into the hallway. I stood there for a long second, watching their figures retreat down the corridor. My mother's voice echoed faintly. "She'll regret this." My father said nothing. The elevator doors closed with a soft ding, and the building fell silent again. I exhaled slowly, then closed the door. Oh, the sound was louder than I expected. A sharp, final slam that reverberated through the condo, through my chest, through everything. For a moment, I just stood there, hand still on the handle, heart pounding. It wasn't anger. It wasn't sadness. It was something deeper, heavier, and yet lighter, all at once. I heard Caroline's footsteps behind me. "You okay?" she asked gently. I turned toward her. "Yeah," I said, my voice quiet, but sure. "I think I just closed the last door that needed closing." She stepped closer, resting a hand on my shoulder. "You didn't just close it," she said softly. "You locked it, and that's okay." Uncle Ray cleared his throat, his deep voice breaking the silence. "You did the right thing, kiddo. It takes guts to stand up to people you love." Aunt Donna nodded, eyes warm. "Now you can start living your life without waiting for permission." Caroline smiled at me, her eyes glinting with pride. "You just ended one story," she said, "and started another." I felt a small, genuine smile tug at my lips. Then maybe it's time to celebrate. People slowly began to move again. The tension eased. Someone restarted the playlist, the music flowing back into the space like breath returning to a body. A few guests quietly excused themselves, murmuring goodbyes and soft congratulations. Caroline and Uncle Ray stayed close, gently guiding the rest of the evening toward calm. When the condo finally quieted again, I stepped onto the balcony. The ocean stretched endlessly before me, the horizon painted in gold and rose from the setting sun. The wind was cool, brushing through my hair, carrying away the last traces of tension. Behind me, Caroline's voice floated through the open door. "You just closed one door and opened another. Madison." I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. Her words sank in, gentle and true. I leaned against the railing, eyes on the horizon. The world felt still for the first time in years. The light of the sunset reflected across the glass walls, painting everything in gold. The color of endings that looked like beginnings. And in that quiet, I realized something simple but powerful. Peace doesn't come with applause. It comes with silence and the courage to keep it. A month passed before I heard from anyone outside my circle of friends. Life had found a new rhythm. Quiet mornings, long runs by the coast, coffee with Mrs. Gomez before work. The noise that used to surround me was gone, replaced by something I didn't recognize at first calm. One morning, as I was sorting through emails, a name caught my eye. Harper Fields, the journalist. Her message was short, but thoughtful. "Madison. I wanted to thank you. The article about your family hit 1 million views last week. People are calling you the woman who closed the door on her past. I hope you're okay with that title. You've helped more women than you can imagine.
I sat there staring at the screen. For a long moment I couldn't move. Then I clicked on the link she'd included. The story was still trending. Golden Tree family when appearances crack. There were thousands of comments below. Most were kind. She did what I wish I could. My mother used my credit to buy a car. I thought I was alone. Peace is worth the price of being misunderstood. I scrolled through them slowly, feeling something heavy but not unpleasant settle in my chest. It wasn't pride. It was recognition. Proof that my pain hadn't been meaningless. On social media, the photo of my parents' gold Christmas tree had taken on a life of its own. Memes, jokes, even a few think pieces about toxic perfection culture. I should have felt vindicated, but instead I just felt tired. Word eventually reached me through relatives. Mom had lost her biggest design contract. Clients didn't want to be associated with scandal. Dad's small consulting business had quietly closed. Vanessa stopped posting her family brunch photos altogether. I didn't celebrate any of it. It was just the inevitable cost of truth. Work went on as usual. At Coastal Reach, people still treated me with the same mix of respect and curiosity. But something had shifted. I didn't chase approval anymore. I did my job, did it well, and went home without feeling like I owed anyone more of myself. On weekends, Mrs. Gomez and I started hosting something small at her community center. A workshop for women in their 40s and 50s called Boundaries and Grace. The name was hers. Because you can't have one without the other, she said. We taught communication basics, financial independence, even how to say no without apology. Every week, the room filled with laughter, tears, and stories that sounded too familiar. One afternoon, near the end of a session, a woman asked Madison, "How did you finally stop feeling guilty for walking away?" I thought for a moment before answering. I used to think I had to pay for love, I said. With money, with silence, with guilt. But love that costs your peace isn't love. It's debt. Now I only repay myself. With peace. The room went still, and then someone started clapping. Mrs. Gomez smiled from the back, nodding slowly. It was late spring when Vanessa showed up. I saw her standing in the doorway at the end of one of our sessions, holding her purse tightly, like she was afraid of being turned away. She waited until everyone had left before walking in. "You didn't tell me you were teaching now," she said. Her voice was soft, almost uncertain. "It's not teaching," I said. "More like sharing what not to do." She smiled faintly, sitting down on one of the folding chairs. "You look different." "Happy?" I asked. "Free," she said. We sat there for a long time, the hum of the old building filling the silence. Finally, she spoke. "Mom lost everything," she said quietly. "The clients, the house. Even her friends stopped calling. She still blames you, of course. But she's not the same. Smaller, I guess." I didn't answer right away. "I don't want her to suffer," I said finally. "I just want her to understand." Vanessa nodded. "Maybe she will. Eventually." She looked down at her hands. "You know, when you closed that door, part of me envied you. I wish I had the courage to do it too." "You can," I said. She gave a sad smile. "Maybe one day." Then she reached over and squeezed my hand. "You deserve this, Maddie. The peace, the home, all of it. You earned it. And you," I said, "gently deserve to stop apologizing for existing." We sat like that until the sunlight faded through the tall windows, warm and gold. When she finally stood to leave, I walked her to the door. She turned back, once her eyes softer than I'd seen in years. "Take care of yourself," she said. "I am." I replied. That evening, I went home to my condo. The sky outside was streaked with coral and orange, the ocean calm and glassy. I stood on the balcony, the breeze lifting strands of my hair. The sound of the waves below blended with the hum of the city, steady and grounding. For the first time, I didn't think about what I'd lost, just what I'd reclaimed, my name, my quiet, my life. The phone buzzed once on the counter, a new email from Harper. Thinking of doing a follow-up. "Would you like to tell what came next?" I smiled and typed back. "No need. The story's finished." I set the phone down, poured a glass of wine, and leaned on the railing, watching the last light melt into the water. I didn't need victory. I didn't need revenge. I just needed this, silence that wasn't empty but full of everything I'd fought for. They had once taught me that money could hold a family together. I'd proven that peace could rebuild what money never could. The wind grew softer, carrying the faint scent of salt and jasmine. I took a deep breath and closed my eyes. I didn't need to win. I only needed to rest. If you've ever had to close a door just to find peace, tell me your story. I'm Madison Cole, and this is how I learned that sometimes silence is the most beautiful revenge.